And then also, how do you turn learning into a revenue generating machine? And doing it so well, we ended up making more money than some of our products.
That is great. Yes, it's so easy talking to you, I must say. I love it. I was really looking forward to this. Okay. And then do I Chris or Christopher? Like, do you
I
like
prefer Christopher. I prefer
Christopher?
Christopher. So
Okay.
thank you.
Yes. I'm glad I asked. I'm glad I asked. Okay. So, Christopher, it has been something I've looked forward to having this chat with you for a very long time. So, thank you for being here. Yeah. Tell the listeners a little bit about you just to get us kicked off.
Yeah, well, I've been looking forward to it as well, and I've always enjoyed our conversations. For folks who may not know who I am, I think I've historically kind of been known as an L&D guy, which tells part of my story, but I would say learning is more of a side effect of what I do. I've always been in the business of business transformation and just looking at really complex things, figuring out the best path forward, and then making sure we bring people along for the ride. And I think that's where I've ended up in learning, is because it's like, well, people ultimately have to carry this out. And so if you look at my background, you'd be like, well, you've been in L&D and all these other things. It's like, yeah, that's the title that's been assigned. But that's where I've spent a good chunk of my career. I was originally a technologist, so a lot of people also know me for my tech savviness, just because technology is a big part of it. But I mean, other than that, I'm a dad of 8 and a devoted husband, and so family's a big part of my life. So I think, yeah, if you follow my content, those are a lot of the things you'll hear me talking about.
Mhm. Yes. And yeah, dad of 8 is definitely something that makes you stand out for sure. How old is your oldest child? I know your youngest, but I actually don't know your
Yeah.
eldest.
So my oldest will be 14 next month. And
Okay.
so
Wow.
they're like two little, or the kids are clustered like dumbbells, and not because dumb, but like the four on the oldest are kind of a little bundle, 14, 10, 9, 8. And then you jump down and it's like 5, 3, 2, 4 months. So it's like boop. And so
Okay.
it's kind of funny. They're little clusters.
Little dumbbells. Okay. I will remember that now forever.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Very cool. Okay. So now is the time that I enjoy the most is we're going to travel all the way back in time to like young Christopher, where you
Yeah.
started. What was like the first paying job you ever had?
So the first one, so I always was interested in spinning things up. And so even as like a little kid, like I remember one time I got in huge trouble because I figured out I could sell my mom's Diet Pepsi for a profit. And so I was like, this is great. Like mom has this whole stash of pop. I'll go do, like, everybody's doing lemonade. I can make way more money on pop. But one, I got in big trouble for that. Two, I wasn't getting paid by whatever. So my first job was actually a paper route. That was really it. I had some really quirky jobs. I assembled anchors where so I had kind of this weird experience where I assembled anchors. And, if you were like, well, how about after school, after college, like what was your first professional job? I really kind of struggled with knowing what to do because I didn't really fit in anywhere. It was like Christopher's is this technology guy, he's a people person. I don't, and I think like a lot of people, not my proudest moment, but I did territory management for Camel cigarettes.
Mm.
And it was a very interesting, that was like my first full-time real job. And really the real reason I took it was it came with a company car and I got cool Camel swag. And I thought, in my 20s, that was the apex of making it, I guess.
That was amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
I need to learn more about the paper, I would say route.
Whatever it is. Yeah.
Um, because I played this game as a kid called Paperboy, and
Paperboy.
did you
Oh
play
my
that? Oh
gosh.
my gosh,
Yes,
yes.
of course you did. You just throwing the paper through the windows,
Yes.
trying not to hit the rocks in the cars. Yep.
I still think about that. Like if I'm driving and there's a whole lot of like obstacles. I'm like, oh my gosh, it feels like I'm in Paperboy all over
I was
again.
built for
But
this
there's no
moment.
tornado though.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, tell me about that. Were there tumbleweeds? Were there tornadoes? I'm sure there weren't, but
So
like
I was in, yeah, so I
fascinates
was
me.
in, yeah,
Did
I
you
was
ride your
in,
bike? Like,
yeah, so I was very young when I started it. And it was kind of one of these things, it'll tell you a little bit about my childhood where like my parents were all about discipline and responsibility. And so it's like, you got to get a job. And I'm like, I mean, okay, I guess this, whatever. And so, and of course, I didn't just get like a little paper route. I got the biggest paper route that the small town I lived in had. So, yeah, I mean, every morning at 5:30, these stacks of papers would show up, and I had to carry two bags because it was so heavy my bike would tip over. And I had these just massive bags, and I would ride all through town and deliver rain, snow, shine. And I remember my dad would be like, unless you literally can't ride your bike, you're riding your bike. So -20 and 3 inches of snow. Hey, if the plows were out before you woke up, deal with it.
wow.
Every once in a while, he'd drive me around, but that was not the norm. It was wild. It was wild. I
Wow.
look back at it now, I would never make my kids do that. And only because it made our family's life a nightmare because if we ever wanted to go anywhere, it was like, well, who's going to do the paper route? And nobody wanted to do this thing. Like nobody wanted to take care of it. So it was like, well, I guess I'll stay home or like we don't go. It
Yeah.
was an experience.
Wow. Yeah. I'm so glad I asked because you can never quite picture it. And I think I don't know if people do it anymore, but I remember like the paper getting thrown over, but never thinking of who's delivering it, and the
Yeah.
time you have to wake up. And so obviously this was before school. Weren't you exhausted?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was like
Gosh.
dark out. And
Yeah.
I'm up going riding around and
Wow.
it wasn't like Paperboy where you could just, whoo. It's like no, everybody had a place they wanted it in a
Oh.
certain door or whatever. You couldn't leave it outside because it'd get wet. And so
Mm.
it was a lot of work. If it was raining, I had to bag every single paper. I mean, it was looking back, I'm like, that's a lot to ask a little kid to do.
Like who employed you? But anyway, we won't go
Yeah.
into that. Child labor. We won't
Yeah,
we won't go
right.
there. Okay, well, that's amazing. I love that story. Okay, so then you did college. So that was like during
Yep.
high school, I'm assuming.
Yeah. No, well, that was like middle school.
Middle school. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
I was like not even a teenager yet when I
Oh
started it. I
wow.
think I started at like 11.
Oh my
So,
goodness. That is
yeah.
crazy. Okay, so 2 years before I can make my son work. Okay. All right. So that and then high school, did you keep doing this for years and years, or you
So I basically had
you
it
doing
all the
anchors?
way
Like when
through.
was
Yeah,
that?
so Anchors picked up in high school
Okay.
because there
Okay.
was this little like warehouse and my dad knew the owner and he's like you need a job, you're not doing your paper out anymore, so nobody wants to do this job, you
Mm,
do it. And I was like, I guess whatever. And I loved it. Honestly, it was the weirdest thing. There was something satisfying about putting these anchors together and knowing the exact way to do it and packing it and stacking pallets. And
mm.
I was all alone, but it
Oh,
was fascinating. And I look back at it, I'm like, I can't believe I did that for years. Like after school, I just
yeah.
go over to the big empty warehouse and pull these things together and the whole assembly line is nuts. It was
Wow.
nuts.
Wow. Yeah, that is fascinating. Like
Yeah.
I love hearing like all of people's weird jobs
But
because
it's funny because going
yeah.
back to it, we so often just think about the things we have and we don't
Mm,
think about how
mm,
they were made or who is involved
yeah.
in putting them together. And I have always had just such a great appreciation and fascination for someone at some point was
Hmm.
somewhere involved in this. Like even
Yes.
even as the machines have taken over,
Yeah.
somebody somewhere was still doing something with this, and
Oh,
that
yes.
fascinates me.
Yes, yes, yes. I think I need to go to like an Amazon warehouse and see what happens there because I'm like, how
Right.
are they doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yes, fascinating. All right. So
Yeah.
then college, right? You
So
did do
college,
college. Yeah.
yeah. So
What did
college
you
I did.
study?
So I was a software engineering major
Okay.
who 2 years in realized I hate coding.
Oh.
I can do it, but this is not what I want to spend my life doing. And if you haven't figured out, I was fascinated with people,
Mm.
and I was fascinated how technology was changing people. And so an advisor was like, that's not a job. So why don't you go into teaching? And so I went to school for education. But my job was I worked in the school. They had like a fast food restaurant in the dorms. And so I worked in fast food. And again, insane experience. And I have so much respect for people who work in food service because it's a grueling job. Yeah,
Mm.
there's a fun element to it, but like it's people are jerks. Like you just like, why are you yelling at me? Because I forgot onions on your burger. Like, I'll get onions on your burger. Like, lighten up, type of a thing. So yeah, I did that pretty much all through college.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's I think is a rite of passage. Like you have to serve people from a
Yes.
place of not being equal to them. You learn so much, like so much about people, so much about dealing with them. Yeah,
Yeah. And it changes the way
it's a
you
good.
behave
Oh, 100%. Yes.
because you're like, I know what it's like to be on the other side of this.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
you know, my Instacart driver messed up my order. You know what?
Hmm.
I'm going to tell him it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a big deal. You got the wrong thing. Don't sweat it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. I can't agree more. Yes. I've
Yeah.
had a few fights with some ex-friends about how they treat wait staff. So
Right.
yes, it's a
Right.
big deal. Big deal.
It is.
All right. So you worked during college. So after college, you said your first professional job was
That was the
the,
Camel
the
cigarettes.
Camel
I,
cigarettes. Okay. So
yeah,
what
I
like
did.
what were
I
you?
taught
You
for
were
a bit. I taught
sales.
for a bit.
Okay.
Yeah. So I actually taught for a bit. And then again, I realized like this academic system thing, like I taught middle school math and computers for a bit. And I was like, ooh, no, 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 no. Because my last 2 years, because I was in education, I had to do like you had to go teach.
Oh,
That's most of what you did. And then I did it for a bit after, and I quickly learned like, nah, this isn't going to work. And so that's when it was like, well, now I'm really lost. So I
mm.
guess I'll be a sales rep for Camel cigarettes.
What did that teach you?
Um, a lot in, well, so a couple things. One, I spent all my time in these convenience stores working around really a lot of immigrants who had come over and had like started a business, and this was their business, and it gave me such a great appreciation for what goes into that journey, and what is it like to try and start up in a new country and figure that out, and take a job that many would think, oh, gas station attendant, and it's like, no, it's you need this, and there's a lot to it. Like it one gave me a greater appreciation of the job itself. It definitely taught me the complexity of like managing complexity, because when you've got 300 different accounts with 300 different people, some of which who don't even speak the language, and you're trying to figure out like, okay, like it was my first global experience where like, whoa, I'm dealing with cultural differences, I'm dealing with all sorts of stuff. um but one of the things is that's actually what got me into, if you can call it, L&D, because the headquarters called me and they said, what are you doing? And I remember being like, who is this? And what do you mean? Like, I don't know what that question is supposed to mean. And it was one of the heads of operations. And they'd said, no, seriously, like, are you doing something in your, and I thought I was in trouble. I'm like, oh. And they said, no, 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 your whole territory since you joined has lifted. And I was like, oh, well, it's because I built all these like little tech solutions and all these resource materials. And I just, whenever I talk to people, I give them out. And on the other reps, we all like, I don't know, call each other and we're at meetings. And I'm like, oh, here, I made this and you should try this. And, here's, I learned this along the way. And they were like, can you come build that for the company? And I remember being like, sure. I mean, I don't, yeah, I guess it'll get me out of, hanging cigarette signs. So I guess. And that was really where I went, whoa, this is a thing. This is
Mm.
a thing I can do and then the project was over. They're like back to the territory. And that's when I was like, well, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I want to do what I was doing before.
Okay, so sales rep, then you went into the head office, created some learning material essentially, and then they
Yeah.
put you back in the territory. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cause it was like the
And then you
project
were
was
like,
done.
no, this is not where I belong. Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Because I
Yeah.
was going to ask you actually, like, as you were telling that story, I just picked it up. I was like, were you good at that? And you didn't say anything, but I was like, it feels like you were good at being a
At the
sales
sales
rep. Like,
piece.
yeah, yeah.
So it depends on how you define it. Because I think a lot of people see sales success as like, did I have the best numbers in the territory? No, because I wasn't interested in like having the biggest quotas and whatever. Like, I was like, well, I need to make sure I hit my numbers, so I'll do that. But I was actually more concerned with the other rep who wasn't performing well, or the new person we'd hired that I'm like, oh, I know what you're going through here. And I think that's why they called me because they were like, you're doing well, but you have this like ripple effect around you, and we kind of want to capture that, which that was where I was decent, right? Would I have won any sales awards? No. And I didn't care about that. I'm like, and that's not important to me.
Okay, awesome. All right. So now you go there back into the territory, and then is that when you stopped working there?
Yeah, so this was probably one of those like career moments where I went, I'm not going to do that again because I kind of had it where when I went back, it really hit me hard that I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I don't want to do this. I want to do that. And there's not a place for me to do it.
Yeah.
And in all the foolishness of someone in your young 20s, I'm like, I quit.
Mm.
And I remember my roommates being like, do you have like a backup plan? And I was like, no. And
But you
I
weren't worried
remember,
about that, right? Like,
well, I guess I should have been because for the sake of my roommates and all, they're like, how are you going to make money? And I was like, I guess I didn't think that far. I just kind of impulsively quit. And they're like, do you want to call your boss back? And I'm like, I can't do that. And yeah, so then after that, I kind of just I did kind of what I thought I knew how to do, which there at the time there was a telecommunications company that it was right on the verge of smartphones and they were struggling at selling smartphones, which is hard to believe now.
mm,
But I remember going, I was interviewing for a sales job because I'm like, well, I don't know what else to do, so I guess I'll do sales again. And as we were in the interview process, they were talking about how difficult it is for their sales reps to sell in these smartphones because people are like, this is stupid. I don't need email on a phone or whatever. And I remember being like, what? Like, it's because they don't understand. And I ended up selling the leader because he wasn't really convinced. He was like, it's just the companies pushing these smartphones, and so we got to do it. And I don't. And I got him so convinced smartphones were the future. He was like, I don't think you should be a sales rep, but can you be like the person who helps with that?
mm,
Because clearly, I think even our sales reps don't understand it, and I didn't get it. And you just convinced me this is like the future. And they actually made this position. It was like sales enable. I don't even know that they
oh,
called it
nice.
sales
Yeah,
enablement
yeah,
at the
something like
time,
that.
but it
Mm,
was like can you just be the person that goes in and helps the customers understand the value, helps the sales reps do this? I'm like, that's not the job I applied for. And this person at the time was like, who cares? We'll give you this title and can you just do that? And it was a wild job. It was out in rural Minnesota. I was going to like state fairs and showing up at these businesses, telling people why smartphones were the future. It was bonkers looking back at it now.
Wow. State fairs, rural, and you like come with a smartphone.
Yeah, and
I can
I'm like
picture
the
that.
guy,
I can
like,
actually picture
guys,
that. Yeah.
this is where the future is going. And
Yeah.
people, are like gathering around the booth, like, who's this nut job talking about email on a
The
phone? And
future.
now that I
Oh,
think
my.
about it, gosh, it's kind of embarrassing to think about now. But yeah, people did, and they're like, he really believes this.
If he believes it, it must be true. And look,
It
it is
must be
true.
true. Like,
It
where do I
is
sign
true.
up? And I'm like, right here. The sales rep can
Yeah.
sell you one now. Trade in your razor and get the BlackBerry Pearl. Oh
Oh,
man,
the
that's so funny.
BlackBerry. Oh my gosh. That was the day I knew I made it in my career because like in our
Right?
company you had to be a certain level. So like a lower level you get a Nokia and then a
Yep.
senior level you get a BlackBerry. And like the day I got
That's
that
when you'd
BlackBerry, I was
arrived.
like, oh my gosh,
I know. I
it's
know. That is
amazing.
so
Now I can
funny.
do email at home. It's,
I know. Oh, I could do work all the time now. This is great.
it's amazing. Oh my gosh. Yeah. If only we knew what was coming,
I
right?
know. I know.
Okay. So that is so fascinating, so fun.
Yeah.
Um, so and that I feel like it was the marriage of your two skills or loves, so to speak. So like the
Yeah.
technology side and the people side, because you were like, yeah, just interacting with people the
Well,
whole
it
time.
it
You
kind
weren't
of
like,
was. I say now that I bridge business technology and human experience.
mhm,
And I think that very much accurately describes where I'm just like in my optimal zone. And that was like the embodiment of it. It's like
mhm,
you
mhm,
have this technology that nobody really understands because they don't understand how it fits in.
mhm,
And I can connect it to that, but then I can also connect it to how this is going to drive your business forward. And you just meld those three, and it was like,
mhm.
oh, this is my sweet spot.
This is it.
So
Oh, so, and how did that feel? Like, how did you know? So, if you're talking to, someone still trying to figure out, what was that feeling, or like you just knew?
I think if I were to think about it, I don't even know that I really knew, other than it didn't feel like work.
Mm,
It was like, I'm just doing, I can't believe people are paying me for this. Like that's where I was like, why would anybody pay? I would do this for free and not you never say that because
yeah,
people will be
yeah,
like, oh, so you'll do it for free. It's like, well, no. And I've over the years learned that people take advantage of you if you do it. But that's how I kind of was like, oh, it almost was so natural. It didn't seem like a job. It was
mm,
just like, well, duh. Like, why
yeah.
wouldn't I do this? It's just what I breathe this way. And it was like, oh, okay. But then the hard part is figuring out, so what does that look like as a job? And I think that's where in the younger years we always struggle with that because we might be like, I know what that is,
Mhm.
but where do I do that? Because I don't know how that works or where does that fit into an organization or what job title even is that? And
Yeah.
that's tough.
Yes, yes. Oh, and I love how you describe that. It's like how I breathe. That yes, and it feels so natural that you could just do it all the time and like lights you up and just gives you energy and like, oh, and I get to earn money doing this. That's amazing.
Yeah,
So yeah, I loved how you described that. All right, so take me from there, sort of all the way up to current day, and then we're going to dig into some more specific things.
sure. Okay, so after that, Verizon bought the company, and Verizon was like, people are gonna buy smartphones. We don't need Christopher Lynn to be our traveling sales enablement person who's selling things out of the local county fair. Um, so I saw the writing on the wall, and I also made nothing. Like I literally was so broke. I lived in my car, like stealing internet from banks, and And I knew that wasn't sustainable. I'm like, being basically homeless is not
Mm,
sustainable. And so I remember I applied to, I don't remember, probably 700 jobs. And I just kind of said, caution to the wind. I'll move wherever. I'm in my 20s. What do I care?
mhm,
You know, and I got an interview with this medical software company. And I remember feeling that same thing I felt in the cell phone company, because they were like, well, we're trying to teach people how to use computers, and doctors and nurses hate computers. And I was like, what? No, they have to, like, it's because of this, and this is how it's going to transform healthcare and blah, blah, blah. And I just remember the interviewers were like, when can you start? Like, like, when can you start? And what was interesting about that was I remember going, thinking naturally I was going to have to move, and they didn't care. I was like, so do you need me to, like, to move out to Connecticut, or like, what are you thinking? And they were like, I, why? Do you want to move? And I remember being like, no, not in particular. And they're like, okay. I mean, they almost looked at me dumbfounded, like, why are you asking that?
yeah.
Are you playing? And I was like, I mean, so I can stay in Minnesota? And they're
Mm,
like, yeah, if you want to. Actually, that works really well for us, because then you're kind of middle of the country. We can
mm,
send you wherever right out of that hub. And I was like, oh, okay. And so that was a wild job, because I was responsible for helping these major health systems figure out how to do tech,
mm,
and just get in there and work with the nurses and the doctors and the support staff and the billing staff. And I learned the whole life cycle of healthcare, which was fascinating to me.
yeah.
All
Yeah.
the medical billing codes. And I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. And I guess in your early 20s, people joke now, they're like, Christopher, do you ever go anywhere? And I'm like, no, not really. But I put in my time. Because
Mm,
back then, like 280 some days out of the year, I was in a Marriott.
ooh,
And it
yeah.
was just like,
That's rough.
that's what I did. I lived in a hotel and
Yeah.
ate Domino's out of my hotel room. Like, all I also learned the glamour of business travel. I was like, yeah, this is not, people, oh, you travel for work? That must be so wonderful. I'm like, no, it's like the worst commute you could ever imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was interesting. But again, it was a transformative thing, because the company said, you are crushing it, but how do you do that for all the rest of the teams?
Mm,
And I was like, well, obviously, I'd set up a center of excellence. That's what I would do. And they were like, perfect. Set up a center of excellence then, Christopher. And I'm like, what
nice.
is that? And they're like, figure it out. And I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
sounds good. And it was also really interesting, because they also said, now you have to make money from our internal training. And I
Hmm.
was like,
Hmm.
huh, how do I turn this into a revenue generating source? And so I was given two really, really, I mean, not only was the whole thing of having to implement healthcare stuff fascinating, but having to set up an entire center of excellence with no idea what I was doing and no guidance, because nobody had ever done it before.
Hmm.
And then also, how do you turn learning into a revenue generating machine?
Yeah.
And doing it so well, we ended up making more money than some of our products. And it was just awesome being like, yeah, this is value add. And it was, yeah, it was a wild experience.
Oh, yeah. And those are skills I think every learning and development person, talent development person can have in their, even in just the back of their mind, even if they're not running a profit center, but that is such a good mindset of like how are
Oh,
we adding value. That was actually my
yes.
very first role as an administrator for the apprentices, and that was a profit center. So I worked for the only training profit center in the company. But like
Okay.
just the mindset that gave me is, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Because
huge.
whether
Yeah.
you have to generate revenue or not, you
Mhm.
are creating products
Yeah.
and you have to create products that would sell.
Yes. Yes. Oh, yes.
And if you don't, you're
Love
not
that.
adding value as much as you'd like to go,
Mhm.
but we love it and we're doing it's like,
Yeah.
but if it wouldn't sell, you'd get
Mhm.
fired in any other job.
Yeah.
So you got to have that mindset.
Yes. Yes. So valuable. So valuable.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So now let's go, throughout. What is one or several, but like career defining moments or decisions or your mindset that has really shaped who you are today and where you are today? There could be one
So
moment or like,
there's one that in particular, there's a
mm,
story I specifically remember where I was in a higher education organization, which would, again, I've got, if somebody ever just was like, Christopher, tell me stories, I could probably tell stories all day long on this. But I remember one in particular at this company because the CEO, COO, honestly, probably one of the most terrifying men you would ever meet. And not, he was the, once I got to know him, he's an incredible guy. So it's not like he actually was scared, but he just had this presence about him. And he was someone who knew what he was doing. He was very serious and he meant business. And he was one of those, and he had no room for BS. And so people were terrified of this man. And he would just like come in the room and be like, how are we doing? And everybody was like, you don't want Jack mad. You do not want Jack mad. And so I remember I had done some work on a bunch of different things and somehow I ended up on his radar. And so he brought me into a meeting and he said, Christopher, we need to fix product knowledge. We need to fix it. And he said, you have a blank check, but here's what I want you to do. And he laid out this, what he wanted the solution to be. And I remember listening to it going, wow, I'm getting everything I think somebody in my field should want, which is a blank check
mhm,
to run and go create as much training as humanly possible. And I remember listening to him and asking some follow-up questions and being like, sir, yes, sir. And walking out of the room going, this is going to be the biggest failure of my career because what he is asking is not going to solve the problem. And I feel sick knowing that I'm going to spend millions of dollars on something that is completely and utterly worthless. And it took me, I told him I'd have an update in a week. I said, I can't tell you, but can I have some time to think about it? That's always been kind of my MO is like, give me some time to process first,
yeah.
and then let me get back to you on that. And again, scary, but reasonable person who was like, fair, when? End of the week? Fine. And so I spent the week, literally, I lost sleep over this because I put together a plan for what he wanted because I didn't want to drop the ball. But then I put together what my recommendation was because it looked nothing like his.
Mhm.
And I remember going, this is going to be the either greatest thing I ever do or the biggest mistake I make in my career. And I was so scared that I actually packed my desk before I went to deliver this because I thought there is a realistic probability that it's going to be like you took a week to tell me why my idea is bad. You're fired.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I remember like my coworkers are like, why are you packing your desk? And I'm like, I can't even talk to you about this right now because I don't, whatever. And they're like, okay. And so I remember going into his desk and I don't think I have ever been more scared in my entire life sitting before him as he's just sitting there and he's like, well, and so I laid out, here's what you asked, here's what I think, here's what I, and he's kind of nodding his head and he's like, okay, okay, you know, not much of a reaction. And I got to the end and I'm like, he seems happy. Like maybe I just like go with this. Like, you're doing good, Christopher. And I was like, no. And I go, Jack, can I be honest? Like permission to challenge your thinking respectfully. And he kind of like thought for a second, who's this young punk? Like, okay. And I said, just hear me out. And so I pushed aside the plan I had. I said, here's my concern. And I went through what my concerns were. I went through repeating back to him what I'd heard the problem was. And I remember then going, here's what I actually think is a better solution. We can move faster. It's more cost effective. It doesn't look anything like you imagined, though. And I recognize that. And so this is not me calling your baby ugly. This is me just saying, I heard what you said, and I think there's a better way to do it. And he didn't respond right away. He just kind of sat and stared at me. And I remember being like, I'm done. Like, I'm done. This is over. And he sat back in his chair and he just looked back at me and he went, thank you for thinking. And I went, like, I'm like, almost, I'm like, what did you say? And he was like, thank you for thinking. I appreciate that. Go with option B. And I remember being like, anything else? Nope. And I walked out of the room being like, what just happened? And it forever changed the trajectory of our relationship because that moment changed. Like, I got invited into all these C-suite meetings. I got invited into things that I had no business being involved because suddenly he's the guy who listens to what I say, thinks critically about it, will tell me if what I'm thinking is wrong, but not in a way where he's like, you're such an idiot. But ultimately, if I say, I hear you, but we need to go with option A, and here's why, he would go, understood. And that for me was a very defining moment that forever changed the trajectory. And I will say it has not always gone that way over the years. There have been many times where I've been thrown out of meetings. So I don't say that like, if you just do how Christopher did it, it'll always go well for you. And like, no, I've been kicked in the teeth. But that moment for me was like, yeah, never give up hope that it's not possible, or you just have to give in to the status quo.
Yeah. Oh, even I breathed a sigh of relief there when you said he thanked you for thinking. I was like, whew, that's a good leader. That is a really good leader. So even though he's so intimidating, he probably had the right intentions and was like just passionate about what he was doing. So
Yeah.
that is a very fascinating story. And so many people, I think, are scared to get fired and they're not, and I don't want to say not able, but like the challenge is just so big. And I have definitely seen that before. So yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that story. Yeah, I'm also,
And that's the thing. Like, I don't tell the story to people ever and just be like, so that's what you do all the
yeah,
time.
just do that. Yeah, yeah. No.
Because there are times that'll get you fired. Like, it
Oh
will
yeah.
get you fired.
Yes,
And so you
yes,
have to
definitely.
navigate that carefully.
Yeah. Oh
But
yeah.
it was one of those ones where I had been told my whole career, you never do what I just did. I'd been told my whole career,
Yeah.
you never do that. And there are just some people you just don't do it. And I remember thinking, that's a myth. That's a myth. And this was the time where it was like, well, Christopher, you
Test it.
ready to test that myth? And I I felt like Adam Savage from Mythbusters, like, okay, well, 3, 2, 1.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Yeah. And I think having that in mind of that COO wanted the business to do well.
Yes.
So if you come with a thoughtful, like, I hear you, but business leaders are there for a reason. They didn't get to where they are because they don't deserve to be there, or they haven't worked their way there. They
Yeah.
want to do well. They want the business to do well. So if you come with a thought through solution, oftentimes that would work. Absolutely. All
Yeah.
right. So
And granted, there's plenty of complete narcissists, psychopaths that
yes.
they don't want that.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
just got to learn how to read and know what you're
Mhm.
dealing with.
Oh,
So,
yes. 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 I have, yeah. I've dealt with both. So yes, I get that. We'll keep that for off the recording.
Yeah, there you go.
Um, okay, so would you say, because another question, just to follow up, what's one of the best decisions you've made in your career?
Yeah. Um, so I remember when I was at GE, um, I was uh, just because of my career trajectory, while I had reached kind of the apex of roles,
Mm,
I'd never had the C-suite title. And not that it really mattered, but for some reason it was like, well, but that's what you're supposed to do, I guess. And I remember getting interviewed for lots of different roles at lots of different cool companies, and they all had the C-suite title. And I thought, whatever. And I remember one in particular early on that, got all the way down the line, all the way to offer. And it just, it seemed like this is what I'm supposed to do, I guess. But something just felt off. I
mm,
was like, hmm. But again, it was kind of in the back of my mind. I'd always been told, well, you get to this level,
mhm,
there's just things you got to do. And I remember looking at the offer letter and talking with my wife and being like, we've got this family and that matters to me a lot. And I feel like taking this means trading something that I don't think I'm willing to trade for. And so I don't think this is the right move. And if this is what achieving that title means, then despite all the things that say this is what you got to do next, then I've got to walk away from it.
mm,
And that was, again, one of these like, you're going to walk from an offer with more money than you know what to do with at a company that has been on your dream list since you were a young kid and for a position that is like it all the things made sense
mm,
and yet they didn't. And I remember going, if this is what it takes to achieve this, then it's not worth it. I remember declining the offer and feeling sick for doing it, but going, well, okay, then I need to change my trajectory
mm,
because obviously that trajectory isn't the trajectory I think.
mm,
And I remember I had all these plans for how I was going to exit G and what I was going to do next. And 2 years went by. So it's not like, and then the next day things worked out. I'm like, no, 2 years of just like, I don't know what I'm doing and where am I going and what's this look like? And I remember I got the call from Chen and they said, you want to be our chief learning officer? And I remember going, here's the thing. Like I've been down this path. It's not going to work. And they were persistent and they're like, no, we really want you here. Think about it. And so they were, insistent and we thought about it. But again, the same things started coming up. Yeah, you got to move to Miami. You got to do this. You got to do that. And I was like, no, like I've been down this journey. I know where it is. And I remember telling them, no. And here's why. And here's why you don't need it. You think you need this? You don't need it. You don't want me in Miami. I'll blow the windows out of the building if I'm physically there. Trust me. And they were wrestling with it. But I was like, okay, I've been down this road. I've said no to this stuff before or whatever. And eventually they came back and said, your terms, your terms. And so it was interesting and a life lesson of one being willing to sometimes give up the thing that you thought you had to have. And sometimes how giving up the very thing you thought you had to have is actually the pathway to finding it in the first place. Which I don't know. It was a very surreal experience.
yeah, things turned out, and now you have your own business.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Things changed dramatically at Chen after almost 4 years,
yeah,
and it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense anymore.
yeah,
It
yeah.
made sense for a time, and then
Mhm.
it didn't.
Yes.
And we kind of, my boss and I mutually agreed that it didn't make sense anymore. And so then it was one of those like, okay. timing sucks because my wife's due in 2 weeks, but
Mhm.
all right, like we'll figure it out. And so, yeah, it's been a journey now of going, so what is the future
Yeah.
for Christopher?
Yes.
And going, well, I don't know quite yet, but I think I do. I know
Hmm.
enough to keep me moving in the right direction.
Yes. What can you share?
Yeah. So I officially launched as Christopher Lynn Co., even though it was weird and I never liked the idea of having my company be my name. But I had enough people around me go, Christopher, just because your company's your name doesn't mean you need to be a narcissistic psychopath. Like you
Yeah.
are a brand. You are a brand,
Yeah.
and you just need to embrace that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you are a brand in what you do, and you can bring the care, the compassion, the humility that you bring with you into what you do, and go out and help people navigate this insane intersection of business technology and human experience, because there's never been a time where more people were going, I don't even know what to do. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to think about. I don't know what to consider. What are the even implications of
Hmm.
what if I do this? What if I don't? And you can bring calm to that storm and help people think through it. And what specifically, people are like, so what industry, what group of people? I'm like, whichever ones are struggling with that problem
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
who.
Yeah.
Because there really hasn't been an area I haven't played in where I
Hmm.
go, I can help bring a sense of calm and a sense of direction to whatever you're doing.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's where I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah. And I love that for you. I'm sure people are going to benefit hugely from that. So
Yeah, well, I
tell
certainly
me,
hope so.
yes, oh, they will definitely. So on this, or maybe you think of something completely different, but what is
Sure.
one thing that people are not speaking enough about in your perspective, from your experience?
I think something that we're not speaking enough about, and I think it's just because we're so uncomfortable with it, is the frailty and the vulnerability of human beings, and this promise that technology can fix that.
Mhm.
Um, and we'll hear keep humans in the center or redesign. We hear all these big things, but we don't really talk about, but like, why? And it's this vulnerability that people have that seems like a disability that's actually a superpower. And we don't talk about, like, we shouldn't be looking to, and it's so funny. I watched a TED Ed with my kids last night about how frontal lobotomies started. And it was this idea that, hey, when we like sever the frontal lobe, people lose their emotions, and it's great. It solves mental health at whatever. And it's like, but that assumes that emotions and passion and the complexity, you're assuming that's a problem to be fixed instead of a superpower to be like positioned, to be like drawn out. And I think that's one of the things that, as I look around right now, we're so focused on, AI can do this and it'll make you better at this and it'll do all this other stuff. And we're not going, but what's really going on the inside with people?
Mhm.
And what are the misperceptions we have of what do we think is wrong with people that isn't actually what's wrong with them? It's what's exactly right with them. And because of our inability to go, yeah, but that's messy and complex and whatever. And what is doing the frontal lobotomy to jobs, to whatever, which is essentially what we're trying to do right now? What are the consequences that we're going to experience? And it took decades for us to realize, you know what, we shouldn't be lobotomizing people.
Mhm.
This is terrible. I can't believe we're doing this to people. With AI, the consequences aren't going to take decades to feel. And I think that's the thing where it's not like, oh, big, scary, ring the alarm bells of this stuff. It's like, no, but I think we'd be wise to spend more time actually understanding people and recognizing our own messed up ways of thinking about things. And
Mhm.
I think that's something we're like, oh, I don't like talking about that. That's weird and uncomfortable. And that means I have to do my own introspection. And maybe I'm not all that perfect. And I'm screwed up. And we don't like to do that. We're like, no, 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 no. How do we put drywall over this and paint the wall? And you're like, I think that's the last thing we need to do right now.
Yeah. We can literally speak about this all day. I love that so much.
Yes.
Yeah. And yes, it's about this partnership, this human side, this messy, make mistakes, creativity while partnering with AI, because I think this whole replacing humans and replacing us or making us better, yeah, it's absolutely the wrong way to be thinking about it. It's like we're
Yeah.
asking the wrong questions. Yeah, so I
Yes.
love that take so much. All right, let's wrap this up and do a full circle. So if
Okay.
you could go back to younger Christopher, what would you thank yourself for doing then?
So this one probably hits closer to home and is probably a little more intense than maybe people would expect, but I would say thank you for not giving up. Um, there were definitely some dark chapters in my life, and there were many times where I just went, if this is if this is all it is, what's the point? Um, and so I think I'd go back and go, Thanks for not quitting, because you don't realize how sticking with it, even when everything said, this is stupid, it's not worth it. Like, oh, now I can come back and say, thank you for not, because I would have never been able to experience even some of the ugliness of it. 20 years later, you look back and go, that's what was going on there. Thanks for not quitting in that moment, because otherwise I wouldn't have learned these really hard things that I needed to learn. And yeah, you could have quit. You could have quit and you didn't. So
Mhm.
thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, quitting is always an option, but yeah, oftentimes it's those exact moments that make us stronger, who we are. Yeah, all the lessons.
Yeah.
So thank you. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. So, how can people work with you? What are you busy working on? I know we've touched on it
Yeah.
slightly, but yeah, let everyone know how they can get in touch and work with you.
Yeah. So I finally, before the end of the year, one of my goals was to actually build a website. So I actually have christopherlynn.co now, which kind of outlines, hey, here's what I do. Here's how you can get in touch with me. And so it's kind of a mix that, I'm trying to help people go, look, don't assume things. Don't be like, oh, I can't work with Christopher because this or this or this or this. Like, how do you know? Have a conversation with me. We'll figure it out. And I'm the first one to say, if there's not something I can help you with, I'll tell you. I can't help you, or you're better suited to work with this person. I don't see it as a zero sum game. So I think that's the big thing. And I'm a avid content producer. So I don't do it for brand building or my own whatever. I do it because I spend a lot of time thinking and learning. And my whole goal is, if the lessons I'm learning can benefit somebody else, then so be it. So that's where I find, I'm like, hey, at least check out my stuff. Maybe it'll help you. And those are probably the two biggest things.
That's awesome. We will add the links for sure. So thank you. Is there any
Yeah.
last words, last things you want to say? Or we good? This has
No,
been
I mean, I've
fantastic.
really enjoyed this conversation,
Yeah.
Candace, and I think the last thing I would just say is the same thing that I would say to myself 20 years ago, to anybody out there who's just like, this is scary and it's messy and I'm going through a lot and I don't know what to think, and is it all going to be okay in the end? Is just to hang in there. Don't quit. Don't give up. Because someday you'll be able to look back and go, thank you for not quitting. So that's what I would end it on.
Yeah. Beautiful. Let's end it there. Thank you so much. It's been awesome.